Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 26th of July, 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, and myself, Brian Gerrish.
We're starting with trade today, Brian, international trade, because, of course, that's something that Theresa May has been talking about a lot. Well, Liam Fox was talking about it yesterday at the Heritage Foundation in Washington. He was making the case for free trade, he said. He said, in my first speech as Secretary of State for international trade, I set out the case for an open and liberal trading environment. That speech was in Manchester, home of the Industrial Revolution, and a city with iconic associations with free trade. That was nearly 2 years ago, when trade barely registered on the radar of most of our media. Now, of course, it's right at the top with NAFTA and all the rest of it. But he said, it's therefore a good time for us to examine both our attitudes to trade from first principles and to measure them against our domestic priorities and international obligations. And he started talking about Adam Smith and David Ricardo. And he said, now, of course, since those days, since 1817, the world has changed beyond all recognition, yet the experiences of globalization and of technological advances unimaginable in Ricardo's time have only served to validate his theory. The principles of free and open trade have underpinned the multilateral institutions, rules and alliances that helped rebuild post-war Europe and the world beyond. They helped usher the fall of communism and tearing down of the Iron Curtain, and facilitated 70 years of global prosperity. And they've raised the living standards of hundreds of millions of our human beings across the world. Indeed, he said, free trade has allowed us to take 1 billion of our fellow human beings out of poverty in just one generation, one of the great achievements in history. Well, what a liar. Because let's look at The Guardian here. This is from some time ago. UK government warned over sharp rise in child and pensioner poverty. So Britain, the bastion of free trade, is experiencing the benefits of free trade, and poverty is rising as a result.
And that's precisely what we're exporting to the rest of the world,
well,
which is poverty and problems as resources are hoovered out of these countries.
Well, absolutely. Any parts of the world that we have any influence over. But if we contrast that with China, China has almost wiped out urban trade. The Guardian said
Poverty.
China has almost wiped out urban poverty. Yes, thank you. Is China smelling of roses? Well, of course not. If you're poor, if you're still one of the poor in China, you're probably living near some kind of toxic waste dump or something. But it's the direction of travel here which is important. China has not lifted millions out of poverty by embracing free trade. They have lifted millions out of poverty, 700 or 800 million people they've lifted out of poverty, but not by embracing free trade. They certainly haven't done it by embracing the Millennium Development Goals, which of course Liam Fox is talking about as well. They have done it in part by manipulating the system, perhaps through protectionism and state capitalism, but mainly through having a development agenda. So let's get back to Liam Fox again, what he said. But the effect of protectionism is close to settled science, as anything in economics will ever be. It means reduced productivity gains and lost economic growth. So, of course, Britain, being a bastion of free trade, is not into protectionism. But unfortunately, Britain has falling productivity. So I'm not quite sure where he's going with that one either. Let's get back to Liam. He said, the global economy continues to rebound from the dark days of the financial crash and ensuing recession experienced by many large economies. Nomura profits tumbled 91% on fixed income equity slump, according to the Financial Times today. Wall Street Journal a day or two ago, prolonged slump and bond liquidity rattles markets. I don't think you're too right about that one either, Liam. But anyway, we go on. He said, in areas such as steel production, we've seen new technologies enable us to produce the same output with far fewer employees. That's really good stuff there. Yes, fantastic. And he said, and worse, in a world of globalization, this is a separate part of the speech, he said, worse, in a world of globalization where interdependency is increasing and where disruptions in one part of the world can quickly ricochet around the rest, our ability to act unilaterally with impunity is diminishing by the day. So this is supposed to be a speech promoting free trade, and here is the key point, because globalization and the British model of free trade, as it's currently perceived, is one where we are absolutely interdependent on everybody else in an equally collapsing Western world, because of course it's the Western countries, the so-called first world, that we're interdependent upon. So I wanted to highlight this in particular because, of course, as Brian mentioned yesterday, Dominic Raab had been talking about the government stockpiling food, and the excuse for the requirement to stockpile food was Brexit and the potential for no deal, and the issue of would we be able to import food anymore from the European Union. And so I thought I would have a little bit of a look at this in the context of Liam Fox's comments about us being increasingly an interdependent world and there being risks in that. So the quote on screen there, it would be wrong to describe it as the government doing the stockpiling, is what Dominic Raab had said. And of course, the idea that we only get food imports into this country from one continent is not appropriate. Well, is that true? Well, it turns out that Britain imports 50% of its fruit and vegetables, and but on top of that, we only are able to produce 25% of the fruit and vegetables that we consume in this country. So only 25% of what we eat is produced in the United Kingdom. 30% of our fruit comes from Europe. 80% of our vegetables come from Europe. So I'm not quite sure how that ties in with Dominic's, the idea that we only get food imports into this country from one continent is not appropriate comment, because of course the point here is that 30% and 80% is all seasonal. So supermarkets import fruit and vegetables from Europe when it's appropriate to do so, and they import fruit and vegetables from actually other parts of the world, but South America in particular, during the winter months when it's not being produced in Europe. So 50% of our fruit and veg imported, and we only produce 25% of what we consume in this country. But Theresa May has a big plan, Brian. We don't need to worry about it because she's going to deal with farming, and she's going to deliver a farming policy which supports agriculture and improves the environment. So this is what she had to say. She's going to scrap the Common Agricultural Policy. We knew that anyway. So she said, scrapping the Common Agricultural Policy provides funds in return for public goods like improving water quality, reducing emissions, and planting wildflower meadows, a fundamental to our new approach. So the fundamental to Theresa May's new approach, bearing in mind that what has been highlighted by this issue of the potential of a no-deal Brexit is the issue of food imports and the lack of independence in our capability of food production. We're not going to produce more food because she's going to scrap the agricultural policy, and then she's going to divert the funds into what have been described as public goods, which is about turning farmland, productive farmland, back into wild meadows.
Which, of course, is all Millennium Goals and Agenda 21 issue.
Absolutely. So my question then comes down to this. Why would we not want to be producing our own food? Is it that we're not going to need food in the coming decades? I'm just going to remind everybody of the outstanding debt graph that we show from time to time. And the key aspect of this on the right-hand side of the donut there is state pensions, a £5.2 trillion black hole in the state pension, ability to pay state pensions. Again, is the British government not expecting there to be too many old people left to pay pensions to in the coming decades?
I think that's exactly where they're going, Mike. And we know at the moment, well, we have a vast amount of information coming into the UK column, which is back on the subject of the deaths of particularly elderly people in the NHS. And of course, an increasing number of people worried about the death statistics. So Brian Jarman being one of those people. Euthanasia is coming in, which we'll unfortunately be moving on to in a moment. So yeah, I think the government's agenda is there will be less people. David Cameron was talking about 2 million people diagnosed with dementia in 2050. I think the deadline for that could have been 2040, but I think it was 2050. And the inference is we need to get rid of those people.
So if we take everything that Liam Fox was saying and we put it with what Dominic Raab was saying, and also with the realities of food production in this country and pension provision in this country, the picture's not looking too good. Well, maybe we should be having more serious conversations about this, because this is the result of government policy. It's not something which is unavoidable. It's absolutely avoidable. And if we were if we were looking at productivity and how we were developing our farming industry in this country and our food production in this country, we'd be in a much better position.
Absolutely. Well, as we move through the news today, I think we'll be looking at some of those policy areas. But let's come in with just this statement: we decide who lives and who dies, and only we. Now, I took this headline because I was going to talk about Boris Johnson in a minute, but somebody else flagged up a headline which we really have to cover, and it's this one: Dutch doctor reprimanded for asking family to hold down euthanasia patient. This is truly, truly disgusting, and it gives us a glimpse of where we will be going in this country, because we have many people pushing to follow Holland on this. But the story is a doctor has been formally reprimanded by the Dutch Medical Complaints Board for carrying out euthanasia on a 74-year-old woman with dementia despite her resistance. The woman refused a cup of coffee containing a sedative, and when she struggled, the doctor asked her husband and daughter to hold her down so she could insert a drip containing the lethal injection. The case is the first time since the Dutch euthanasia law was passed in 2002 that a practitioner has been formally censured. According to the Dutch NOS broadcaster, the public prosecutor will announce after the summer if the doctor will face criminal prosecution. So we're now into the heart of it. We have euthanasia, whether you like it or not, is coming into Western European policy. And of course, the Dutch lead on this has already been pushed to come in through the UK system. The lady had dementia. She's held down, and she's effectively, in my terms, murdered. For whose benefit? Well, presumably the state, because the state ultimately didn't have to pay for her care. Well, remember the lead headline from the column: we decide who lives and we decide who dies. And let's bring in Boris Johnson. And this is another astonishing statement which gives us a look at the heart of British government. Would we have killed them with a drone strike? Too damn right. Boris hits back at criticism as jihadi beetles face the death penalty in the US. And I've entitled that Conservative State Executioner Beyond Authority, because this is where we've got to. Now, the two men at question, Alexander Coty and Shafi El-Sheikh, are linked to the murder of 27 Western hostages. Notice the language there, Mike. They are linked. And that, in my mind, is not the same as proof that they were the murderers. They are supposedly members of the IS terror gang of 4 men from West London dubbed the Beatles, which included the notorious executioner jihadi John Coty and El-Sheikh, who have been stripped of British citizenship, now face extradition from Syria to the US on terrorism charges. It's what is not stated in this article which is a key. So I'll just bring in Shafi El-Sheikh there, picture insert. Stripped of British citizenship, how did that happen? On whose orders did that happen? Was it done in order to make sure that they didn't stand trial in UK?
Well, they were stripped of British citizenship by the British government without a judicial process.
Correct.
And that's, for me, this is the issue, the extrajudicial aspect of this whole thing.
Right. So let's have a look at what Boris had to say. Here we are. Suppose the grizzly bear had been located a couple of years ago in Raqqa, and let's suppose there was a Reaper drone overhead and that British intelligence could help send a missile neatly through their windscreen. Would we provide the details knowing that they would be killed without a chance for their lawyers to offer pleas in mitigation on account of their tough childhoods in West London? Would the British state in these circumstances have connived in straightforward extrajudicial killing? Too damn right we would. So here we have the British government saying we're very happy to deny trials where evidence can be brought forward. We're very happy to simply kill, the word is murder, people overseas if it helps our agenda. What would the case be if in a trial, Mike, it emerged that these men were themselves threatened with death unless they did what they were doing? What would the circumstances be if these men were to allege that they did what they did because they were forced to do it by British intelligence? No, we don't want to bring anything like that into a courtroom. So let's go on with Boris here. The report says the 4 Beatles were responsible for killing at least 27 people. Well, the article started by saying linked, I think. So why do we support these extrajudicial killings with no due process and panic at what might happen in an American court? The best hope of bringing Coty and El Sheikh to justice is in America. And in sending them there, the UK government has not dropped its opposition to the death penalty. So Boris Johnson is really saying we don't have a judicial system. We don't have law operating in UK anymore. We have to send them to America, apparently.
But what he's also saying is the UK government has not dropped its opposition to the death penalty. Well, he's talking about the civil death penalty. So if you're in a criminal court, a civilian criminal court, not a military criminal court, there's no death penalty. Clearly, they do support the death penalty because they've said so in a letter to Jeff Sessions saying, "Go right ahead. We're quite happy for that to take place."
Yeah, this is immense. I think some of this is the most dangerous stuff that we've had on UK Column. He says we had to balance 2 risks: the risk they would be simply set loose, like so many other jihadis, to roam the streets of London again, or the small risk they might receive the death penalty. Home Secretary Sajid Javid and I decided that the first risk was worse than the second. Who really believes we were wrong? So we've got a situation where people who are labelled as terrorists, let's just follow that line, well, we haven't got a justice system capable of dealing with them in this country because he's worried they may have been released onto the streets. Wouldn't that have been a decision for the Home Secretary himself? But the decision is taken that we can't try these men in Britain. They're going to be sent to America. And Boris Johnson really can't understand why anybody should have any complaints about his decision-making process. This is a fiefdom, Mike. We're now into the stage where the criminal cabal that's running this country is openly boasting now of its ability to simply murder people. And don't you worry about it. You can't do anything about it. We've decided. Who could possibly imagine that we were wrong? Yep. This is pre-Nazi era.
Well, as we said the other day, Brian, the danger here is that because many people would have some sympathy with the position that these 2 were jihadi killers, they were murderers, and that they deserve the death penalty, that they are prepared to give away protections in order to, because of what they personally believe about these 2. The fact of the matter is they have not yet been found guilty in a court of law. And if you decide that the government can behave this way with impunity without having any restrictions on their activities through the courts, then you're in a very dangerous position. And you're exactly right, pre-Nazi in its sort of in the way that it is.
And I'll be fascinated to see some of the reaction to our report on this, because I've no doubt in certain quarters there's going to be a backlash because we are commenting on so-called terrorists. But the point is of what's coming on the back of that terrorism in this country. And if people don't understand how serious this is, coupled with these same politicians making decisions of life and death for dementia patients, for instance, I think there's a lot of people got to wake up to the speed at which Britain is now becoming effectively a fascist state.
Okay, good news, Brian. The F-35 has now made use of its new vertical landing pads at RAF Marham for the first time. So the 2 the new F-35 multi-role combat jets have used their vertical landing capability to land on the new vertical landing pads. Now, this is really amazing because, in fact, construction presented a significant engineering challenge, construction of these pads, because standard concrete is just not suitable for this. The design team had to source special materials from Germany because Britain isn't capable of making them, to make concrete which had the ability to withstand the high temperatures created by the aircraft engines. Without this, apparently there would have been a risk of cracking, which would in turn present a significant risk to the aircraft. And this was the first time this material has been used outside the USA. So the Germans are making it, but apparently they don't use it. Only the United States uses it. And it required a rigorous testing process to ensure that the landing pads were fit for purpose. And I have to ask, what have they made the deck of the Queen Elizabeth from, Brian? Because this is clearly the only material that's capable of withstanding the extreme heat from the F-35. But nonetheless, it is good news. The F-35 is able to land vertically at RAF Marham at the moment. But for how much longer? Because, here's Russia Today. US lawmakers defy Defense Secretary green light delay in F-35 sales to Turkey. And they say US Congress moved closer to an outright ban on sales of F-35 jets to its NATO ally Turkey. For its decision to buy Russian S-400 missile defense system, lawmakers have now okayed a delay in delivery despite warnings from the Defense Secretary. Now they're saying that the senators say the Defense Department may not deliver any F-35 to Ankara until Congress gets the report. Turkey received 2 jets in late July. Well, they did and they didn't, because the two jets were delivered, but they were delivered in the United States, and Turkish pilots are flying them in the United States at the moment. They haven't actually been shipped to Turkey, and at the moment it doesn't look like they are going to be shipped to Turkey. Why is this a problem, and what's this got to do with vertical landings at RAF Marham? Well, as we've mentioned before in this programme, but we'll highlight the Register article on this from a few months ago. Yes, British F-35 engines must be sent to Turkey for overhaul. So at the moment, the F-35 is able to land vertically on this special vertical landing pad at RAF Marham, but possibly for not so much longer, because if Turkey can't get F-35 parts, which is currently the case, then Turkey can't fix the engines. And I'll just quote a little bit from this article. It says, as LREG reported last year, the Pratt & Whitney F-135 engines of Britain's frontline carrier fighter jets can only be overhauled in Turkey by decree of the American Joint Project Office managing the F-35 project. And they cite Harriet Baldwin, who was the minister responsible at the time. She said to the Defence Select Committee, in terms of the engine programme, that will happen again within Turkey. I believe the warehousing of other aircraft components is happening in the Netherlands, and there's a series of ongoing competitions. Turkey is a NATO country, and the question was put to her that this has never ever happened before. And she said, well, there was a net benefit of having Turkey overhauling mission-critical major components of the only fast jets capable of flying from the new aircraft carriers in exchange for avionics repairs being carried out in North Wales. And she described these repairs that are going to take place in North Wales as being good for the UK industrial base. So there you go. There's the situation we're in. Turkey can't repair our F-35 engines because Turkey isn't allowed to have any F-35 engine parts at the moment. It's not a problem, and at least there won't be any problem with the new vertical landing pads at RAF Marham cracking up with the heat, because there won't be much heat from those engines in the not too distant future. And
the good news is there's going to be plenty of work opportunities for the avionics repairs in South Wales, because the avionics systems of this aircraft don't work either.
Absolutely.
So there we are. Well, good news. The good news is that the BBC is paying out, well, we're not too sure how much, but well over £1 million to a tearful Sir Cliff Richard. Sir Cliff has, of course, won his court case. So the BBC is successfully burning public money in vast quantities. Let's just have a little look at what they're talking about. BBC has agreed to pay $850,000 in costs to Sir Cliff Richard, as the bill for the privacy case against the corporation tops $1 million. So the High Court judge awarded the Star $210,000 in damages. but the BBC is now going to pay up that 850,000 towards the bulk of the singer's legal fees, which total £1,111,376. So there we are, money hoovered directly out of the public purse by the BBC, then thrown away in legal cases, ultimately to protect Sir Cliff Richard. Where has that taken free reporting, free press in UK? Well, it's made it even more difficult for people to actually report what they see, hear and believe. Is this just an accident by the BBC? Mike, I don't think so. When I see the report, you find out, of course, that what emerged in court was that it was only a very few people in the BBC decided to take this action in the first place. I think it would be a good starting point if the BBC started to claw this money back from the salaries of those individuals that made the decision in the first place.
I would like to know how, in a case like that, it's possible to go through £1.1 million in legal fees. I think there's a question that needs to be asked. How is that even possible? This isn't the most significant case on the planet. There's something fishy about that. So okay, he's been given £200,000 in damages, but that does seem like
outrageous sum of money.
Yes.
If anybody can help with those details, we'll be extremely interested.
Right. Well, it's not massively hot in the studio today.
I've got a tie on, but it's a reflective tie.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I had to laugh at the sun here. Sizzling temperatures of 37 degrees C will set a July record, sparking plague of rats as sharks infest coast and toxic air blows in. So I'm not quite sure how sharks infesting the coast and toxic air causes a plague of rats. But anyway, I just thought it was quite amusing because, of course, Plymouth has had a plague of rats in the not too distant past, well, it wasn't 37 Celsius temperatures at the time, Brian.
These are cold weather rats.
Cold weather rats, right? Yeah. Right.
They're a bit like the Siberian beavers.
Yes. So, if there is going to be a plague of rats, I do wonder if that's anything to do with temperatures, or if it's more to do with the fact that local councils are not cleaning rubbish off the streets anymore and clearing away bins and so on. But the situation is so serious that the House of Commons has had to put out a report. The Environmental Audit Committee has put out a report today saying that at current temperatures, 20% of homes overheat. There's no regulation to stop overheating homes being built. And they're really concerned about this. They say higher summer temperatures are regarded by many as a welcome change in the UK's climate. But heat waves threaten health, well-being and productivity. In August 2003, heat wave temperatures reached 38.5 Celsius in England, and there were 2,193 heat-related deaths across the UK in just 10 days. The Met Office predicts that the risks of heat waves of similar intensity will occur every other year by the 2040s. The average number of heat-related deaths in the UK is expected to more than triple to 7,000 a year by the 2050s. Although heat waves have become more frequent, our inquiry revealed the need for clear government leadership and cross-departmental collaboration in preparedness for heat waves. Although adoption of heat waves spans the remit of many government departments, our inquiry found that there is a silo approach to policies for heat wave risk. So we're straight into the common purpose language. And they're saying that 1 in 5 homes, as I said a second ago, dangerously overheats during heat waves. They're saying buildings, particularly hospitals and care homes, must be prepared for heat waves. And with sick and elderly people especially vulnerable to heart and breathing problems. Other measures including formal guidance from Public Health England to relax office dress code and allow home working during heat waves, and to head teachers about relaxing school uniform policy and boys wearing skirts and so on. Steve Brine, giving evidence to MPs, said that heat alerts tend to be seen as barbecue alerts as opposed to there being a risk. Mary Cray, MP, chair of the Environmental Audit Committee, said the government has sat on its hands, ignoring the warnings of the Committee on Climate Change, and left the UK woefully unprepared. So we must not think of these heat alerts and that Sun headline and the other headlines that we've shown on this are demonstrations of this policy. We must not rely on heat alerts to be seen as, or being seen as barbecue alerts. They're not barbecue alerts, and we shouldn't be having barbecues because that's way too dangerous. We've got to appreciate the risks involved in these high temperatures.
Okay, and the risks are severe. Luckily, we do have the BBC to fall back on, because the BBC, as part of one of their articles today, produced a truly stunning climate change related scientific discovery. So brace yourselves for this. But apparently Labourers Peter Wackett, Jake Phillips and Luke Culhane say they sweat lots in their overalls when it's hot. So that's a major part of a BBC story today, all about heating. I think this is really tremendous reporting, Mike. I mean, did a few people in a closed room decide to interview these labourers in much the same way as the policy was decided with Cliff Richard?
Yes.
There we are. Anyway, so if you're worried about what to wear when you're working, you've got to wear the appropriate uniform, the hard hat, and you've got to have the overall on and the gloves, etc., because of health and safety. But that could make you sweat. So there we are. Brilliant. Well done, the BBC. Well, of course, they went on and said quite a bit more. Here was part of a truly pathetic article by the BBC. And what was the little headline there? So I'm laughing as I say this. UK heatwave 2018. Why is it so hot? So I think the headline was designed to bring you to the conclusion that if you read this article, the BBC would explain why it was so hot, but really they don't do that, Mike.
Right.
So it's a video actually, but it has got captions. Encourage people to have a look at the video because it is so pathetic. But this man is interviewed. He's David Shukman, the BBC science editor. He said everything points at the moment to the jet stream, this high altitude band of wind that flows around the world governing our weather. At the moment it's behaving in a strange way. It's looping in a series of big meanders, and if you're on the south of the jet stream, which we are at the moment, you get hot weather. So it would appear that because the jet stream is doing something they don't understand and they don't know what's caused it, we're getting the hot weather. Okay, let's move on, because of course he says more. He says we can never say that a particular weather event like this heat wave is due to global warming. You understand that? We can't say that. What science allows you to say is that the world is warming. That makes certain things more likely, heat waves more likely, and certainly the latest research suggests that in the decades ahead, heat waves will become more common. So the linkage there is spectacular. We can never say that a particular weather event like this heat wave is due to global warming, but what we can say is the world is warming, which is going to make heat waves.
But he's already said that that this is probably because of the position of the jet stream, but they don't understand what makes the jet stream move. But it is global warming that does that.
There's a particular expression called a mind something, and reading this material, it really brings it home to me. You are reading, if you just sit back with your cup of tea and think about the words on the page, or what you're hearing coming out of the mouths of these BBC reporters is utter nonsense, cobbled together in such a way as to appear to be talking some form of scientific common sense. But who's the lady behind this production? Well, here she is, looking radiant, I must say. This is the image from her Twitter page. A stunning little dress there, and I think those black shoes go very, very well with it. And she says, well, we can't blame global warming for the heat wave just yet. We'll only be able to spot trends in years to come. And no, it doesn't mean that we'll have a heat wave every summer.
Does that mean this is because they haven't invented the evidence yet?
It looks like they haven't quite got the evidence, but they're saying, of course, the evidence for global warming is irrefutable, is what the BBC says. So, Emily, I'd stick to your foreign holiday there, because clearly you're failing on analysis of the heat wave. But of course, if we come back to the main man, David Shukman, it gets worse. Climate change will make heat waves temperatures normal by 2040. Oh, he doesn't say it, MPs are warning.
Yes.
So we're
not sure that they did.
We're pumping out fear on the back of the fraud of global warming. Luckily, somebody else got onto his Twitter page a little bit before me and posted this. You frauds have been promising global warming for decades. Brackets, I've been looking forward to it. So why are our winters so darn cold? So this is good to see from the public. And of course, the BBC really having a big cheer, because it can get into what it loves best, which is death. Regular heat waves will kill thousands. So we've now concocted a completely false story, a false narrative, but the BBC absolutely on reheat, more so than the F-35, of course, because we can now kill thousands of people. So apparently the Environment Audit Committee warned of 7,000 heatwave-related deaths every year by 2050. That's pretty good. Higher temperatures put some people at increased risk of dying from cardiac, kidney and respiratory diseases. That's all good news for the BBC. And then during the 2003 heatwave, excess deaths in nursing homes in parts of the UK rose by 42%. Well, they would, BBC, wouldn't they? Because the policy in a lot of homes is to dehydrate elderly people to create those dementia symptoms. Catherine Brown, head of adaptation at the Committee on Climate Change, said, water shortages are a concern. We can expect greater water deficits across the country, including in cooler, wetter areas like northwest England.
That'll be why they've just given permission for Cuadrilla to frack then?
Yes, I would say so, and why they're going to bring in restrictions on boreholes. NHS Committee Chair Mary Cree, is that pronounced? I don't know, said heat waves threaten health, well-being and productivity. So there we are, Mike. It's all wonderful fear-mongering. But the BBC put in a claim in this article. Scientists differ on whether the current global rash of heat waves is definitely caused by climate change, but they all agree that future heat waves will be hotter and more frequent thanks to carbon emissions.
That's going to be a lie.
I'd say that's a lie as well. So let's follow it through. Here's the lady slumped in front of her fan. Is this fake news or government propaganda? It's both, Mike. It's a really incestuous mix of propaganda and fake news. So what they're really doing is saying we don't know what's caused the heat wave. We can't blame it on global warming yet. So we're going to spin the line that it's due to global warming, for which we failed to produce any evidence whatsoever.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking, how can the BBC do this? Well, the answer is this little organisation, the Committee on Climate Change. And we didn't know a lot about them, but when you read into them now, it's quite interesting what these people claim. They're independent. They're providing advice to government on building a low carbon economy and preparing for climate change. So that's all good. It says our purpose is to advise the UK government and devolved administrations on emission targets and report to Parliament on progress made in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and preparing for climate change. Now, who's the lead man? Well, here he is. It's Lord Debon. Mr. Gummer, most people would know this gentleman as. The longest serving Secretary of State for the Environment, 1993 to 97. A variety of interests, but here he is advising the government on all matters to do with environment and climate change. He just has a few fingers in pies because he's also involved with a company called Sandcroft, an international sustainability consultancy helping some of the world's leading companies improve their environmental, ethical and social impact. So you help create the policy, you feed it to government, then you make money off advising businesses how they need to apply the policy the government is going to require from them.
Excellent.
It's good.
That's a good business model.
It must be good because he's into another one of these consultancies, Valpac, the leading provider of environmental compliance, data and resource management services, supporting businesses in the UK and internationally.
So there's no conflict of interest there?
Well, I wouldn't have thought so, Mike, because they're independent. But it's a family business, of course, because here's young Felix Gummer. Very interesting young man. So here he is working for Sandcroft. And I was just fascinated on his background. He's got his overall responsibility for leading business development strategy and implementation. He has a particular focus on private equity, retail, FMCG sectors. He's worked across all areas of commercial sustainability, nearly a decade of which was at Tesco. He started his career gaining planning consents and delivering 800 square feet.
No, 800,000 square
Sorry,
feet.
800,000 square feet of the world's most sustainable supermarkets.
Oh, good.
So why haven't we got all those vegetables?
Well, this is a good question.
I don't know. They're good at zero carbon. He published the Tesco PLC Corporate Responsibility Report for 2 years. So fascinating how this little advisory group goes round in a circle. It's advising government, creating policy. It can then advise the commercial sector who can increase their profits. Well, have a look. I had to put in a little video clip here. Encourage people to go and see these people for yourselves. An amazing mix of people with supposedly environmental qualifications, but also a lot of big money people. So we've got financial institutions in here as well, carbon tax. This is all about, in my mind, big organisations making money rather than preserving the planet. But this gentleman caught my eye, and he's a very interesting character because he's a professor of behavioural science at Warwick Business School, and he's got particular interest in cognitive and social foundations of rationality. I'm not sure whether the organisation is rational, applying behavioural insights to public policy and business. Now, what's this about? We've been warning about this. This is the government's programme to interfere with people's minds in order to get their policy across. And Mindspace is a document we flagged up many years ago because it provides a simple overview as to what the government is up to. But one of the warnings in this document was stated here, as noted, Mindspace effects depend at least partly on the automatic system. This means that citizens may not fully realise that their behaviour is being changed, or at least how it is being changed. Clearly, this opens government up to charges of manipulation. People tend to think that attempts to change their behaviour will be effective if they're simply provided information in an above-board way. People have a strong dislike of being tricked. This dislike has a psychological grounding, but fundamentally it is an issue of trust in government. And we've now got an expert helping to advise the government, presumably, on how behavioural insights can be used to change people's opinion without the people realising what's happening. So if we join the dots and remember what Boris Johnson said, he can decide whether somebody lives or dies. Here's part of the report from Mindspace where it says that in essence the public need to give permission and help shape how such tools are used. But of course the government has never given the public the opportunity to decide. This policy and use of this has just been slipped in by the back door. So can we trust people like Boris Johnson to use applied behavioural psychology? I don't think so somehow. But I'm going to say credit to Booker because Booker in the Mail has ripped into all the nonsense about heat waves, pointing out that basically the whole thing is a fraud.
Okay, well, let's end with this one then. because chicken farmers or anybody that keeps chickens is going to have to make sure the baby wipes are at the ready. The Public Health England is particularly concerned about the onset of Newcastle disease in the UK. Cases of Newcastle disease reported in smallholder flocks and commercial poultry sites in Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, and they're concerned that it's going to come across the Channel to the United Kingdom. So poultry keepers across the UK have been urged to be vigilant of cases of Newcastle disease following reported cases in flocks across Europe. Now, of course, they've got to be careful in certain poultry species, including commercial and specialist breeds, pet chickens, other captive birds, including racing pigeons. But don't worry, because Public Health England advises that the risk of Newcastle disease affecting people is very low. Now, they said that about Novichok and Salisbury. And so the advice that Public Health England hasn't given here, but I think they should give, is that if you see Newcastle disease in your chickens, probably the best approach is to wipe them down with baby wipes. And you know, if your chickens are not, if you can't wash them in the washing machine with normal detergent,
or dry clean them.
Well, I was going to say you probably need to double bag them before you send them to the dry cleaners. So there you go. Newcastle disease potentially coming to attack our chickens. I think it has originated in Russia, but we haven't had any evidence of that just yet.
No. We'll just say that if you're new to UK Column and you've watched today's edition, particularly from overseas, and you're struggling to get to grips with the news that we've reported, we'd like to say to our viewers and our listeners, please get away and check all of the material that we've presented so that you can see for yourselves that what we're saying is completely and utterly true. We're living in La La Land in UK in 2018. The government is getting worried about the treason laws. Why would that be? We'd suggest because it is our own government carrying out treason against this nation, and it's becoming ever easier to see. Meanwhile, don't forget the baby wipes if you've been handling chickens. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.